Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our C notes for slope and y-intercept from a graph. Our learning targets for today are: I can identify the slope and the y-intercept from a graph. And the second one is I can write an equation of a line represented in a graph. So determining the slope when given a graph, again, slope measures the steepness of a line. The slope of a line can be determined by finding the vertical change and the horizontal change from one point on the graph to another point on a graph. Slope is always written as a fraction or simplified to a whole number. Okay, so the vertical change is always the up or down movement, and then the horizontal change is we're looking at moving to the right. Okay, or that's the rise, which is the y-axis, over the run, which is the x-axis. The symbol delta, a triangle, this is the Greek symbol delta, and what it means is change. A lot of times whenever we are solving for rise over run, we will say the change in y over the change in x. Okay, and the next part here is we are determining the y-intercept when given a graph. The y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis. So if I have a little graph, sketch a little graph there, and I'm just going to throw a line on it. Okay, the y-intercept is going to be the point that intersects the y-axis. This is the y-axis, this is your x-axis, okay? If you think of an interception, if you think of football and an interception, it's where the football crosses the other team's hands and the other team catches that football. Well, a y-intercept is where the y-axis catches the line. It's that point right there, okay? So moving on to the next slide. We've got an example here that I wanted you to add to your notes. If we've got this line here, we're going to talk about picking the leftmost point. We can pick any point on a line to find slope. And that's going to be our first task, is to find slope. So if I'm looking at the point G and I'm going to point H, here's point H. What is our vertical change? And remember, vertical is our up and down. Vertical equals the up or the down movement. Up would represent positive, down would represent negative. And then we will look at our horizontal. Okay, our horizontal movement, we're always going to be looking, if we move to the right, that's going to be a positive. If we move to the left, that's going to represent negative. Okay, so let's look here. For our vertical change from G to H, I have to go down 1 unit. Make sure that you're looking at your scale. So I went down 1. My vertical change would be -1. In my horizontal change, from that point, I have to go 1, 2. And I went +2, I went to the right, so that's +2. I went to the right 2, and I had to go down 1. That's my -1. So that slope, if I simplified that, that would be -1 over 2, because a negative divided by a positive is a negative, and I have 1/2. Okay, so let's look at the exact same line and go from point H to point J. Okay, so if I'm looking at my horizontal change again, from point H, I have to go down 2 this time to get level with H. So I went down 2, I went down, which would be -2, and then from there I had to go 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right, so that's a +4. So I went to the right, and that's a +4. And a negative, just simplifying, a negative divided by a positive is a negative, and 2/4 as a fraction can be simplified to 1/2. Okay, are you noticing a pattern here between these two, the first two? Same line. Let's look at two more points. I'm going to look at point J here, and I'm going to work backwards to get to point G. So let's try that. Our vertical change. This time, if I'm going from point J to G, I would have to actually go up 1, 2, 3. I have to go up 3. So if I have to go up, that would be a positive 3. And then, excuse me, I would have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 horizontally to the left, which would represent negative 6. There's my negative 6 because I had to move left. Let's simplify our ratio, our fraction. Okay, positive divided by negative is negative, and 3, 6 would represent to 1/2. Check that out. Every one of those slopes is exactly the same. Okay, so slope formula, as I said at the beginning on the previous slide, I said change in y, and change in y would represent subtraction. If you're finding change, that's subtracting, right? So if I'm picking 2 points, let's just start with our, let's go with G and H. We can pick any 2 points on the line. So point G is, if I'm looking at the ordered pair, G is negative 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Negative 2, positive 4. And point H is 0 and 1, 2, 3. So it's 0, positive 3. Okay? So if I'm looking at my slope here, I need to find the change of y over the change in x. Okay? Whenever I'm looking at this y2 minus y1, and this is on the formula chart that you were given, okay, it doesn't matter. We've got here, these are my y, but those are my x coordinates here, and these are my y coordinates if we're looking at it kind of like a table. Okay, if I said that this was my y1 and this is my x1, that's just my first ordered pairs, all that means. My y2, and if I say this is my x2, that's my second ordered pair. Okay, so now that I have my points labeled, it's going to be pretty simple to stick them in my equation over here for slope formula. So y2 we just said was positive 3. Be really specific whenever you're dealing with your signs. Remember, we're subtracting. It's always subtracting because we're finding the change. Okay, so y2 was positive 3, and I'm subtracting y1, which was positive 4. And then my x's, if I'm looking at my difference of my x's, x2 I just labeled as 0. And then I have x1 as negative 2. Y'all, this is where our integer rules really come into play. Okay, I've got 3 positives and I'm taking away 4 positives, so in actuality that would equal, what would that equal? That would equal negative 1. If I have 3 and I'm taking away 4, do you hear the dogs? Okay, and then I have 0, take away a negative. Okay, well these, whenever you have double signs like this, here, minus a negative is the same thing as plus a positive. They cancel each other out. Okay, you may have heard keep, change, change. In 7th grade and 8th grade, we're transitioning to getting rid of the double signs, and it's actually plus a positive. So I have 0 plus 2, which equals 2, right? So either way I look at it, from my graph or from my formula, I get the slope is negative 1/2. Then we've got the y-intercept, and that's really the easiest thing, because if you look at your y-axis here, we had a point right there on our y-intercept, and that was at positive 3. Okay, so if you recall, our equation is y equals mx plus b, which that is also on your formula chart. And whenever we write our formula, we always want the y equals something x. Our m, let's label it, slope is our m. That is our slope, is negative 1/2. And b is our y-intercept. and our y-intercept we just said is positive 3, so I want to put plus 3. If my y-intercept would have been below, looking at my graph up here, if my y-intercept would have fallen below the x-axis, then I would have said, say it was down here, I would have said it's negative 3 or minus 3 in my equation. But this positive 3 shows my y-intercept is above the x-axis. Okay? That concludes our C notes for solving or writing an equation from a graph. Okay? And have a great day.